Hey Magic Makers, Mombierella here, and I'm so excited to share the incredible time we had in Louisville, Kentucky. So get ready for a whirlwind of awesome.
A little wet.
You're going to see fantastic art, a hotel review, and delicious eats with these videos coming up. But let's be real, the main event was the Louisville Ghost Tour and the sneak peek I got inside the Bourbon Inn. Please note all ghost stories in these videos are the property of Louisville Historical Tours and David Domine. And this is only the beginning. Part 1 with much more fun ahead. Hey Magic Makers, Mombierella here. I am in Old Town Louisville, Kentucky, and we're gonna go check out the ghost tours. These houses are beautiful, this area is amazing, and I can't wait to share with you guys. So we're going to meet David today, and he's gonna tell us all about some of the history, some of the ghost stories here, and then also he's got a few books that he's written. So we're gonna learn a whole lot and see what we're just gonna go check. Come on, let's go have fun. Let's go. I gotta say, it's really pretty.
Here we are in Old Louisville, otherwise known as America's most haunted neighborhood. They say down here in Old Louisville, you can't go more than half a block without there being a reportedly haunted house. That's what we're going to check out today. Some of our most famous cases of alleged hauntings. A little about the neighborhood. It's one of the largest historic preservation districts in the country with 45 square blocks. Roughly 1,400 old homes are found in the neighborhood. And most of them date from the 1880s and 1890s, so that makes these Victorian houses. Many of them are built of stone and brick. And some of my paranormal friends think that that's why it's such a haunted neighborhood. You know, a lot of people have different ideas about what hauntings really are. You know, are they spirits that return from the netherworld, or are they souls that are kind of trapped in one dimension and try to reach out to the next? Some people think it's perfectly explainable phenomena, what we're dealing with. And down here with all the stone and brick construction, we have thick walls and solid foundations. A lot of my paranormal friends think what we're dealing with here are what are called residual hauntings. And that is, you know, things that happened in the past, they kind of imprinted themselves on a location, and thick stone walls, massive foundations, they retain energy more so than light, airy wooden or frame constructions would. So given the right circumstances, these memories that have kind of imprinted themselves on a location, they play themselves back, kind of like tape recordings. And that's what they think is going on here in Old Louisville. So generally our tours take about 100 minutes to check out the most famous haunted sites. It's a lot of ground to cover in a little time. We can't share all the stories, but we can share some of our favorite stories. So if you're ready, let's go ahead and I'll give you a nice introduction to America's most haunted neighborhood. Awesome. Okay, so this is 3rd Street. This is what would become the old Millionaire's Row in Louisville. Back in the day, this was kind of out in the country. In the 1880s, Louisville hosted something called the Southern Exposition. It was a kind of early World's Fair. And it put Louisville on the map, and it led to the city more than doubling in size in 5 years. And so the city expanded out this way. This whole area was kind of annexed and developed as what many would consider the first suburb. So that's why the houses, they tend to date from that time of the building boom, the 1880s, 1890s. And early on, this was just kind of a country lane. Downtown, 3rd and 4th Street were kind of the main shopping districts. But with the Southern Exposition going on over here, they paved this street and straightened it out. They put in these double wide sidewalks. It became a promenade street. And this is where some of the wealthiest people began to build their houses. And what's interesting about Old Louisville, we're known as a Victorian neighborhood, but you don't find just that Queen Anne style that people think of as Victorian, you know, that quintessential gingerbread style, like the famous painted ladies in San Francisco. We have all these other styles that are Victorian as well: Renaissance Revival, Chateauesque, Italianate, Richardsonian Romanesque, Beaux-Arts. Every house tends to be different from the one next door, so it really makes a nice backdrop for telling stories. During the day, it's not quite as scary. At night, when the gas lamps are on and the sun's going down, it's a little spookier down here. But how I got into all of this is in 1999, I bought a house here on the old Millionaire's Row, and I lived down on the next block. My house was a small house by Old Louisville standards. It was only about 4,000 square feet, had 7 bedrooms. And I moved in the fall of 1999. Right before I moved in, that's when the previous owner just casually mentioned I'd be getting a ghost that came with the premises. She said a poltergeist named Lucy was on the property. And I love ghost stories. I've always been fascinated by the paranormal, but I'm also a skeptic. I've always said, when a ghost walks up and shakes my hand, that's when I really start believing in ghosts. So I just poo-pooed Margaret's warning. She was the woman who sold me the house. And she saw I didn't believe her, and she's like, David, I'm serious. We have a ghost, and I just want to let you know. You'll hear her walking down the second floor hallway in the middle of the night. She knew I had cats and dogs. She said, she's going to tease your pets, and they're going to chase her around. They're going to see things you won't be able to see. The last thing she said, I know you think I'm crazy, David, but whatever you do, don't hang a picture on the wall here in the butler's pantry next to the kitchen, because if you do, Lucy will knock pictures off that wall. She hates pictures right there. And so I moved in, and of course, what's the first thing I did? I hung a picture right on that wall. And sure enough, that very same day, later on, I was upstairs in my office on the 3rd floor when I heard a crash downstairs. I ran down to see what it was, and there that picture was lying face down on the tile floor. The glass was broken, scattered all about, and so I went and got a broom. I was sweeping up the pieces, and that's when I looked over and I saw that the nail where the picture had been hanging was still in the wall. It was kind of poking up at an angle, and I couldn't understand how the picture came up over the nail, because I saw when I was sweeping up the pieces, the back of the frame still had the wire totally intact. And so I just quickly disabused myself of any notions that it might be paranormal. I thought, you just didn't hang the picture right. And I swept up the pieces, sent the pieces back to the framers, and I had the picture fixed and hung again. And I didn't hang it right for the next 6 times after that.
Oh, wow.
It took me 7 times. And sure enough, everything Margaret said would happen in the house began to happen. Within a couple of weeks, I began hearing footsteps going up and down the length of that hallway on the 2nd floor. And right away, I discovered old houses, they make a lot of noise. But these weren't like random creaks and groans. They were like measured, hard-soled shoes, lightly traversing the length of the hallway up and down. At first, I was always there by myself, so I would just put my head under the pillow. I'd be like, you're not hearing anything, you're not hearing anything. Try to convince myself, I was just going crazy. But then other people started to hear it. And long story short, that first year we were in the house, we had all these things happen that people would say were paranormal in nature. But I never saw that ghost I was hoping to see to kind of make me a true believer. But that year when I lived in the house, the first year when all the spooky things were happening, that's when I met my neighbors and fellow homeowners down here. And it turns out they all had stories about their houses. The average house down here is like 135 years old, so it's seen some history. And so some of them knew about scandals that had taken place with families in the past who resided there. Some of them had ghostly goings on. And when I moved here in the 1990s, the city was really doing nothing to promote this neighborhood, which I could never understand. And so I started talking to these people and writing their stories down, and I researched them and tried to flesh out the missing pieces. And I kind of saw it as my way to kind of step forward and help promote the neighborhood. And so I started writing about Old Louisville and its legends and ghostly lore. And people reading my books, they wanted to see the places they were reading about. So we started these tours as a way to get people on the streets and to educate, to show off the neighborhood, to make money for different neighborhood associations. And it's been great. This is officially our 21st season that we're opening for this year. So we've been doing it over 20 years, and we get people from all over the world. And we don't just do ghost tours. Those are our most popular. We do history and architecture tours. We have food tours, other tours as well.
Like, so y'all go different places to eat?
We'll sample.
Cool.
Yeah, downtown we have a Nulu food tour.
I have to try that one next time.
Yeah, next time. But so this is kind of where it all started. And so the stories I'll share are kind of the first stories I ever wrote, and some of my favorite stories about the neighborhood. If we were to stop at every haunted house, we'd probably only go 2 blocks, because they're all over the place. So we're gonna have to skip some to give you a good view of what's in the neighborhood. But this is one of the most popular stories, and it's the very first story I wrote about the hauntings here in Old Louisville. It has to do with that church across the street. That's the old First Church of Christ Scientist. It was started in 1916, and it's the location of one of our most famous and definitely one of the oldest and a very tragic ghost story. And it involves a beautiful female apparition who we see pacing back and forth up where those columns are. Usually it's in the evening, and usually it's in the times of year when it's cold. People strolling by, they look up and they see this beautiful statuesque young woman. She's maybe 18, 19 years of age. She has jet black hair kind of done up in a Gibson girl kind of hairdo, and she just sadly paces back and forth. Often, they say, you can hear her sobs echoing down the sidewalks as she paces back and forth. Always she's wearing a long, kind of flowing white gown, because when you're a female ghost, what do you need to wear? Long, flowing white gown. So she's kind of a stereotypical ghost, but they call her Miss G. And Miss G, as she's known, the G stood for Gathright. They were one of the prominent families down here. Miss G, as she was known, came from a local family, the Gathrights, but her part of the family came from Bardstown. That's the old bourbon capital. It's about a half hour south of here. And in 1918, Miss G graduated from high school. She was thinking about going on and studying, which for a woman back then wasn't very common, but those plans were quickly curtailed because her parents, it turns out, they were experiencing financial difficulties. The family was on the verge of bankruptcy, and their only hope of salvation was to marry their one lovely daughter off into a wealthy distilling family. The problem was there was only one man available for marriage in their town at the time, and that was an elderly widower, many, many years older than Miss G. And of course, he thought that was a pretty good idea. Miss G's parents were fine with it. Miss G wasn't too excited about that match, however. And it wasn't just because he was so much older than she was, it was because she was in love with somebody else already. So it was 1918, World War I was still raging. And Miss G had fallen in love with a dashing young soldier. He had earned some leave. He came back and they met in Bardstown. They were hoping to get married on the sly, but he received a telegram telling him he had to go back and join the unit, so he had to leave abruptly. And he promised his beloved that when the war ended, he was finally discharged, he'd come back and get her, and then they'd be married. Well, when the parents got wind of this, they weren't happy. That was going to thwart their plans. And so they sent their daughter away so she wouldn't be in town when the soldier came back. They sent her here to Louisville because down on the next block, there was a wealthy aunt and uncle who agreed to take her in. They would kind of chaperone her and make sure she saw the right people. What nobody knew, though, was Miss G and her boyfriend had stayed in touch all this time. And the soldier, when the war finally ended in November of 1918 and he was discharged, he found out if he re-enlisted right away, he could have his choice of postings across the country, and he could have a lucrative career as an officer. That included being posted at Camp Zachary Taylor, the largest military base in the country, and that was here in Louisville. Just about 2 miles that way as the crow flies. So he took that post, knowing that would bring him closer than ever to his beloved. And it turns out it was easy for the lovebirds to meet because Miss G, her aunt and uncle, they weren't the strict chaperones the parents had been hoping for. They were allowing their niece to go out unescorted at night. And every night around 8 o'clock after dinner, she'd leave their front door and she'd say, "Aunt and Uncle, I'm going down to Immorti's to see my girlfriends and I'll be back in a bit." Immorti's was a famous ice cream parlor that stood on that corner there. Back in the day, it's where all the young people met. So to her credit, Miss G wasn't lying. She was going and seeing her girlfriends, but she'd only hang out with them for a couple of minutes, and then she'd excuse herself. She'd make her way back to the steps of the church here, because back in the day, these steps were the rendezvous spot for all the young sweethearts in the neighborhood. And any given night, there'd be dozens and dozens of couples up there rendezvousing. And that's where Miss G and her boyfriend would meet every night like clockwork. So a month went by like this, another month. Eventually, Miss G and her boyfriend grew tired of sneaking around. They decided it was just time to run away and elope. So they met here on a Thursday night, and they decided the next night they'd carry out the plan that they had been hatching. And that plan was to meet at their normal time, but then go down to Union Station where they could get the overnight train to Chicago, where the young man had family. They'd stay with his relatives, they'd get married, and then break the news, and people would have to deal with their elopement. So the next night, Friday night, rolled around, and at the ice cream parlor right away, people knew something was up because Miss G arrived with a suitcase swinging at her side. Well, they quickly put two and two together, but nobody said anything. Nobody tried to stop her. And after a bit, Miss G came back to the steps. She started pacing back and forth, waiting for her would-be fiancé, but there was no sign of him. The evening wore on. It grew colder and darker. And eventually, all the other couples that were up there, they began drifting away. In the wee hours of the morning, it was just Miss G up there all by herself, pacing back and forth in the chill air. Well, right before daybreak, some late-night partygoers were coming down the sidewalk over here. They were returning from a night out. In that group was a friend of Miss G's. He looked up in passing and saw her. He said, "Hey, Miss G, why are you out so late? What's going on?" And she told him she was waiting for someone, and her friend offered to wait with her, but she said, "Oh, I'll be fine. He's got to be here soon enough. You go on with your friends, and, that's that." So he said, all right. He said goodbye. He started returning down 3rd Street with his group. But halfway down the next block, he told his friends to go on without him. He said he didn't feel right leaving his friend here all alone. So he rushed back so he could wait with her. He got back to the steps right as the sun was coming up that next morning. And he was a little bit startled when he looked up and saw that Miss G was no longer there. He went up to the columns, looked behind them. The alcoves were open back then. He looked there. Miss G was gone. So he assumed in those several minutes that had transpired, the boyfriend must have shown up, and they were probably going to go down to get the morning train that went to Chicago. And he left, and people thought that was that. So that next day passed, but when darkness fell that next night, people in the neighborhood were kind of surprised because walking by, they looked up, and there Miss G was in her normal spot, pacing back and forth. This time, though, she looked different. She was sickly and pale looking. When people tried to talk to her, it was as if she couldn't see or hear anybody. It was as if she was in a trance. She just paced back and forth all night long. And the same thing happened as with the previous night. All the other couples began drifting away, and in the wee hours of the morning, it was just her until the sun went up and she disappeared. The next day, the same thing played out. No sign of her until the sun went down. But there she was again, pacing back and forth, sad, forlorn, and trance-like. This time, though, people said you could hear her sobs echoing down the sidewalks as she paced. So people began asking around, what's going on with Miss G? Why is she so sad? What's she crying about? And they found out why she was crying the next day when the Monday morning paper came out, and they were able to read about what happened at Camp Zachary Taylor over the weekend. So this would bring us to early 1919 now in the storyline, and World War I had finished, but the Spanish flu was still raging. And so it was the second of the 3 deadly waves of the Spanish flu. And estimates vary, but they say as many as 800 soldiers died at Camp Zachary Taylor. And so what happened is the night they were supposed to elope, the young soldier had come down with the flu. He was one of hundreds of soldiers quarantined at the barracks. He knew he was going to leave that night. He had packed his bags. When the time came, he tried to leave and come to his beloved, but he was sick. They caught him. They returned him back to the quarantine barracks. And all night long, he kept getting up, trying to sneak out through a window with his bag and come to his girlfriend. Eventually, they got tired of catching him and returning him. They just tethered him down to the cot so he couldn't get up. And he tried to explain that his girlfriend was out here waiting. It was cold. Someone had to go to her. But by that point, he was delirious. He was incoherent. Nobody understood anything he was talking about until it was too late. So the sad thing is that first night, Miss G was here waiting. She paced all night, back and forth in the cold night air. At daybreak the next morning, she did give up finally and go home. But she went back to her aunt and uncle's kind of heartbroken. She thought she'd been abandoned at the last minute. What's really sad, though, is she returned to her aunt and uncle's, and that day she contracted the flu as well. And the saddest part of all in the story is 2 days later, both Miss G and her boyfriend were dead and buried, and they went to their graves never finding out what happened to the other. So they say her sad ghost is still here today, pacing back and forth, waiting for the young soldier to show up and take her away. Until he does, we have her, the Lady of the Stairs, our most romantic, our most tragic ghost story in Old Louisville. Here we have another of our ghost stories that's been around for generations. It involves this house built in 1890. Locals call this the Bowen house. And you see these porches across the front. It's another case of an apparition that's been seen for decades. And they call this apparition the ghost of the old lady in the rocking chair. So people strolling by in the evening have reported sightings of what looks like your stereotypical granny, a woman in a high-waisted skirt with long-sleeve lacy white blouse, a cameo brooch at her throat, hair done up in a bun in the back. Some say she looks like she's flesh and blood. She's in a rocking chair and she interacts with people. She will wave. Other people say no. They'll be walking by after the sun goes down and the porches are empty, but they'll see like a little bouncing orb of light, and it bounces around and all of a sudden explodes into like a bunch of shimmery bits that coalesce into a two-dimensional opaque apparition that's all in black and white. So how she manifests herself is different, but it's always that same description, the ghost of the old lady in the rocking chair. And according to what we know about this place, it's another story where the haunting ties into the early years of the structure. So this is the old Millionaire's Row, as I said. This house is a little different from a lot of them on Millionaire's Row. If you look at it, you can see this is a shared house. We call it a duplex today. Back then they called it a semi-detached house. And get this, when Mr. Bowen, a wealthy merchant, announced plans to build this shared house on Millionaire's Row, his future neighbors were kind of concerned. They were wondering how that was going to affect their property values. And so a committee got together and they tried to dissuade Mr. Bowen from building a shared house on Millionaire's Row. They said, come on, be like everyone else, build a single family mansion. Don't, bring our property values down. And that's when Mr. Bowen let it be known that he was building this house this way for a reason. He had 2 daughters he had to provide for. All the rest of his family, his children, were taken care of, but he was getting older, he was sickly. He wanted to make sure his 2 daughters were taken care of before he died because, get this, they had reached the age of 30 and they weren't married. They were destined to be spinsters. That was the kiss of death back then. Right. And when the neighbors heard this, they thought, oh, poor Mr. Bowen, he's just trying to do something nice for his daughter. So they didn't give him any problems, and he continued with his plan to build this shared house. The idea, each daughter would take up one half and reside there. Well, he did have some problems then, but it wasn't from his neighbors. It turns out he had problems from his daughters. They hated each other, and they refused to live side by side in a shared house. And so for a couple months, Mr. Bowen had to coax and cajole them, and he finally, got them to agree to move in, but on one big condition. He had to change the original floor plan that had the houses flush in the front with the porches even across the front. He had to break one half off and set it back from the other, so that way the porches would be broken and offset, and that way at night each lady could sit out in her own rocking chair and not have to look at the other on the other porch. And if you go stand on one of these porches today, you don't really see what's going on the other porch. So they think what we're seeing is the ghost of one of the grumpy old sisters that used to live here. So that's the ghost of the old lady in the rocking chair.
Make sure to come back next time because you don't want to miss what is coming up. We get the chance to learn the tale of the witch's tree, and I had an amazing opportunity to give you guys a special look inside the absolutely gorgeous Bourbon Inn. Y'all come up. He's got these awesome books that he's written, and there's the plate. I just said it. I jinxed it. So you guys come on up to Louisville, Kentucky, and this is the original Old Town Louisville, right?
Yeah, Louisville Historic Tours. We specialize in walking tours of Old Louisville, otherwise known as America's most haunted neighborhood.
So how can they find your tours? Do you have a website?
Yeah, you can go on www.louisvillehistorictours.com. You can find our tours on TripAdvisor, Viator, places like that. Also, you can find out more at www.daviddomine.com. That's my personal website. And we're looking forward to seeing you in Old Louisville.
Yep. So you guys come out, check it out. And if you haven't had a chance to yet, please take a second, hit that thumbs up. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss out on any of the awesome adventures and fun stuff we get up to. Remember, let it go, keep moving forward. Hey, awesome, have you shared this out with your friends? Wait, we let it go and move forward. Have you shared this out with your friends yet? You should share it. It's cool. It's neat, right? Okay. Anyway, remember guys, let it go, keep moving forward, and have a magical day. Love you guys!